Hi, welcome to Bible Bites. I wanted to talk to you today about a very unusual verse. The idea that there is something lacking in regards to the afflictions, the sufferings of Jesus. What could possibly be lacking? I mean, but that's the very thing that Paul says in Colossians chapter 1, verse 24. Now I rejoice in what I am suffering for you, and I fill up in my flesh what is lacking in regards to Christ's afflictions for the sake of his body, which is the church. The question we want to ask is, what is lacking in regards to Christ's afflictions? What could possibly be something that's missing? Now, let me just explain what it's not. It's not anything to do with the payment of our sins. Paul is very, very clear about this and makes it very clear all the way through his writings. In fact, just a couple of verses earlier, he's even said it. Come back with me, verse 22. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. Holy in his sight and without blemish and free from accusation. All of that has been done at the cross. So there's nothing missing in terms of what we need to make up in terms of our sin. It's not like there is a point where Jesus pays for some of our sin and we somehow have to make atonement for the rest of it by putting ourselves through suffering. Now that's really important because throughout church history and even today there are people who will see that and use this verse as an example of that somehow I need to suffer in order to pay for my sin. No, Jesus has done it all. But that doesn't answer our question then. What is still lacking in regards to Christ's afflictions? What's missing? Well, let's stop and think about that for a moment. If Jesus has died for our sin, what's the one thing I need to do? Well, earlier on, we've already mentioned that, isn't it? It's to put my faith, my trust in Jesus. You notice that there in verse 23. If you continue in your faith. Now, how do I put my faith in Jesus? By hearing about him. And that's what Paul does, is he makes Jesus known. And the rest of this paragraph is all about Paul's ministry of making Jesus known. Now, of course, that comes with suffering. I would love to be able to say that every time you tell someone about Jesus, it's all going to be plain sailing and there's not going to be any opposition. I mean, where I am in the world, it's pretty minimal. I mean, people might make fun of me and that's about it. But for Paul, he had to go through all sorts of suffering. He was in jail, he'd been beaten up, he'd been left for dead. But I want you to notice what he says when he goes, in terms of going through that suffering, he says, I rejoice in what I'm suffering for you. It's not that he's rejoicing because he goes, I love pain and this is so much fun. But he realizes that suffering means people are hearing about Jesus. And if people are hearing about Jesus, I don't really mind the suffering. Now, I want you to think about that next time you face suffering for making Jesus known to others. It's not easy and it can be difficult. But you might want to come back to this verse and go, yeah, it's hard. I feel a little discouraged and beaten up, but it's worth it if one person hears about Jesus and turns to him. A little bit of suffering, I don't really mind. So I want you to think about that as you talk to people about Jesus and to think about what is lacking in regards to Christ's afflictions. That is, we need to make him known. And I want to challenge you today, how much of your life is about making Jesus known, even through the suffering? Are you rejoicing in that? Are you seeking to make him known? Just like Paul is.